Okay. Okay, Doki. Folky.
Wow.
That was...
Okay.
I'm a poet now, damn. Hello, Crime Time Podcast. It's Joshua Miles, and welcome to the 5th episode in season 1 of this podcast, featuring myself, Kirsty Sky. Say hi, Kirsty.
Hey, everyone.
Molly Westbrook.
Hi, guys.
And Dark Curiosities.
Hi.
We're really, really sorry that there wasn't an episode last week. As we said on social media, there were a few scheduling conflicts, which meant that we couldn't get out an episode. But we're back again this week for another episode, and we're really excited to bring you this case. This podcast is a laid-back true crime podcast, but despite its nature, this podcast has not been made to cause disrespect or anything like that. It's just been made to spread awareness about different cases by compiling information from various different public sources on the internet. And with all that being said, let's delve straight into this podcast. Theme music. Today's oddity in the news is yet another story that comes from the wonderful land of Scotland. Dark Curiosities and Kirsty Sky, you'll got a lot of explaining to do with these oddities. Actually, no, wait, you don't, because Scotland, it makes sense. This story was reported on by Newsweek.com, and honestly, it makes me die with laughter. I actually can't stop laughing trying to read this now. It's sending me so much. Okay, let's jump straight into the headline. You guys might have heard this one. Man charged with repeatedly farting during strip search.
Oh my god.
What?
A man in Scotland has been ordered to perform 75 hours of community service after intentionally passing gas as police officers conducted a body cavity search.
Wow.
Police are responding to a vehicle collision in Aberdeen when they noticed a 28-year-old male called Stuart Cook speaking to the driver of another vehicle which was involved in the collision. The police officer noticed a strong smell of marijuana coming from Stuart and decided to search him and his vehicle. They found a small amount of marijuana as a result of those searches. Now, possession of marijuana is still illegal in the UK, so the police subsequently handcuffed Stuart, who immediately began to scream and act aggressively. Stuart was taken to a local police station where he was booked for possession and then strip searched. During the strip search, Stuart allegedly passed wind intentionally multiple times.
Oh my god.
It gets even better. He farted in the direction of the searching officers 3 times, stating, "How do you like that?"
Oh my god.
Wow. Oh my god.
Stuart's defence later told the court that Stuart had been smoking marijuana at the time, and the police, and he felt that the police had overreacted in the way that he had dealt with them. Due to this, he had become very upset and decided to react by farting at the police officers.
Oh my god.
Stuart pled guilty to the possession of a controlled substance and to behaving in a threatening or abusive manner. Interestingly, he was actually admonished without penalty of the drug charge, so he was only charged with the behaving in a threatening and abusive manner.
Wow. I can just imagine this guy with a thick Doric accent just like moaning at the police and then just like letting them out like
Oh, that literally makes me feel so
oh
sick.
wow.
It's so funny. Imagine being the police officer.
I know.
I know.
You're just trying to do your job and then someone's just farting at you. I'm like, what?
Especially if he's smoking marijuana.
Oh.
Oh,
Guys,
Oh,
I
wow.
just...
Oh my god.
How do you even think to do that?
Well,
That's
I don't know how
iconic. And the fact he didn't even get charged with the drug possession in the end, it
I
was
know.
just for farting at a police
Oh my
officer.
god.
That is so funny.
That in itself makes me laugh.
Again,
so
like
much.
last time's oddity that was from Scotland, like honestly does not surprise me.
I'd like to thank Scotland for giving us this good, happy, positive
the gift
news.
that keeps on giving.
We're the gift that
Yeah.
keeps on giving.
Scotland really is the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh my god. Could you imagine though, like a policeman just coming home at night, you know, and it's like he's got his dinner all ready and they're like, "So what happened today?" And he's like, "This guy farted in my face." Like
3 times.
3 times. The cheek.
Oh.
it's like, no, seriously, and he got charged with it. Like,
I can't even begin to imagine. How somebody had to fill out that paperwork.
I know.
I know.
It's like, what's in your criminal
I
record?
know.
Well,
Imagine if that's the only thing this guy got charged with, like, ever. His only criminal record is farting at a police officer. Oh my gosh, that
Brilliant.
was. Thank you, Scotland. What can I say? Thank you, Scotland.
That was hilarious.
And that brings us to the end of this segment. We'll be right back in the next segment where Kirsty Skye will be discussing a very, 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 very big case that she's been teasing us for a while. I'm really excited to hear it. Theme music!
Right, okay, so today's case I'm going to be discussing is the Rillington Place Strangler, also known as the Rillington Place Murders and the crimes of John Christie. Have any of you guys ever heard of this case before?
Besides what you've told us briefly, I haven't heard anything
I
about
haven't,
it before.
actually.
I've heard of the TV series. I watched a bit of the TV
Yes,
series.
I
Like
watched
both the new one and the old one.
Yes, I watched the new one a couple years ago, but anyway, I will get straight into the case. So, John Reginald Halliday Christie, more commonly known as Reg Christie, was born on the 8th of April 1899 in Blackboy House, Turner Lane, is it Northram, in West Riding of Yorkshire. To parents Ernest John Christie, a carpet designer, and his wife Mary Hannah Halliday Christie, daughter of a local businessman and Liberal councillor. The Christies had 7 children. They had Percy, Florence, who was known as Sissy, Effie, Elsie, Winifred, John, who was Reg, and Phyllis, who was known as Dolly. Reg was the second youngest, and he didn't have a very good relationship with either of his parents, really. His father was involved very much in the local community, but he was very strict and abusive behind closed doors, and he used to get his children into trouble for literally the tiniest of things. I remember reading somewhere that he accused Reg of stealing 1 tomato from a shop or like a stand, and he whipped him for it, basically. And it was just little things like this they would always get into trouble for. However, Reg's relationship with his mother was, according to different sources, it's kind of differs to his father's relationship. His mother really doted on him. She made it pretty obvious that Reg was her favourite child, and Reg adored his mother, despite the fact that she and his sisters actually bullied him a lot of the time. They sort of belittled him. So Reg grew up in Halifax before moving to West Riding in Yorkshire. He was an extremely intelligent child. He had an IQ of 128 at just 11 years old, and as a result he was given a scholarship to Halifax Secondary School, where he performed excellently, especially in woodwork, history and mathematics. He was extremely talented at algebra, to be more specific, but despite being a very clever child, he wasn't very popular. He was quite quiet and kept himself to himself, and was actually described by his peers as, quote, a queer lad. Outside of school, Reg was involved in the Boy Scouts, the church choir and a local drama group, and he left school in 1913, where he became an assistant cinema projectionist at the Commodore Cinema in Hammersmith. Now, one of the significant events in Reg Christie's young life, which contributed to his murderous future, was when his maternal grandfather David passed away in March 1911 at the Christie residence on Chester Road, Croydon. Is that how you say it? Croydon? I don't know. It was at this point that 11-year-old Reg saw the dead body of his grandfather in an open coffin in the funeral parlour, and this visit actually made a very lasting impression on young Reg. He became fascinated by the corpse in front of him and claimed to feel a sense of power and well-being looking at it. He also rather disturbingly began to spend much of his spare time playing in the local graveyard and was fascinated by the broken vault which housed children's coffins, and he later admitted that he used to enjoy sort of looking through the cracks. He was very morbidly curious about these sorts of things. By 1917, Reg had enlisted in the army, and he was called up a few weeks prior to his 18th birthday. He became an infantryman in the 52nd Nottingham and Derbyshire Regiment, and in June 1918, whilst he was serving with the Duke of Wellington Regiment as a signalman in France, he was injured in a mustard gas attack, and as a result he was sent to hospital in Calais, where I believe he stayed for around a month or so for treatment before returning to his duties. Afterwards, he actually claimed to have lost his voice and sight for around 3 years after the gas attack, which resulted in his voice becoming somewhat of a whisper for the remainder of his life. But his alleged blindness was never on any hospital records. And interestingly enough, according to Scottish journalist Lodovick Kennedy, if Reg had become mute, he wouldn't have been declared fit to return to the army. So Reg was actually known to exaggerate a lot due to an underlying personality disorder, sort of as a way to get attention, something which he craved after having such an isolated and lonely childhood. Whenever he was in an uncomfortable situation, he would always exaggerate illness, more specifically, especially after he was hit by a car shortly after moving to London in 1934. He also visited the doctor's office an excessive number of times. He was one of those people who constantly worried that there was something wrong with him, and he made, honestly, a crazy amount of visits to the doctors. However, a year afterwards, he was demobilised from the army, and this is when Reg met a woman from Sheffield named Ethel Simpson Waddington, and the two of them moved to the Sheffield area. Unfortunately, Ethel suffered a miscarriage not long after the pair were married, and something which significantly strained their relationship was the fact that sex was something Reg struggled with in his adolescence and for the remainder of his life. He actually suffered from erectile dysfunction, and he was teased relentlessly about this by his peers and was given a number of cruel nicknames. He was never able to perform in the bedroom unless he was with prostitutes, as he felt he had absolute full control over them. After around 4 years, Reg and Ethel separated, and it was at this point that Reg went to live in London, whilst Ethel remained in her hometown of Sheffield, where she gained employment as a typist. Now, over the next decade or so, this was when Reg Christie started having run-ins with the law, resulting in a number of prison sentences. Most of these offences committed were actually quite petty crimes. However, one crime against a prostitute was labelled as a, quote, murderous attack. In April 1921, Reg was given a 3-month jail sentence for stealing postal orders whilst he was working in the postal service. In September 1924, he was given a 9-month sentence at Uxbridge Jail for theft. In May 1929, a further 6 months of hard labour for actually striking a prostitute named Maud Cole on the head with a cricket bat. whilst they lived in Battersea, where Christie was working as a lorry driver. And in 1933, he was given a further 3-month jail sentence for stealing a car from a priest who he had befriended. And Reg was eventually released in January 1934, and it was at this point that he reconciled with his wife Ethel. Following their reunion, and despite the fact Reg still visited prostitutes, the couple moved into a top floor flat. The couple moved into a top floor flat at 10 Rillington Place, a 3-story brick end terrace located in Notting Hill, London, alongside their pet cat and their dog. They moved into the property initially in 1937, but they moved downstairs to the ground floor flat in December 1938. Now, each flat at this property had a single bedroom. Well, I think it was it was a double bedroom, but there was just one of them, a kitchen and a living room, but the tenants had to share an outhouse, bathroom, as there wasn't any in the building because it was built in the 1870s. 10 Rillington Place itself was located near to the old Metropolitan Railway line, so the constant noise of trains would have been very, very loud for those who lived in the building. By this point, World War II had begun, and having left his job as a foreman at the Commodore Cinema in Hammersmith, Christie joined the War Reserve Police, a job he adored due to the fact that he had authority over people, especially women, and authorities actually failed to do a background check on Christie, not looking at his criminal record and previous convictions, so they accepted him onto the force without batting an eye. Christie was subsequently sent to work at Harrow Road Police Station, and it was whilst he was working here that he met a woman named Gladys Jones, with whom he began having a 5-year affair with. But Gladys's partner had actually been serving in the army, and he did so for the duration of the Second World War. And he actually returned out of the blue at the end of the war, and he walked in on the two of them having sex. And this resulted in him basically beating Christie up for sleeping with his wife. And it was after this incident that Reg Christie only ever sort of invited women to his home rather than going to theirs, because obviously he didn't want the same thing happening again. During his time with the police, Reg used his position of authority, as I've already mentioned, to his advantage. He actually reportedly commonly followed women and kept notes about them. He even watched his neighbours regularly through a peephole in his kitchen. And by 1943, this was when Reg Christie committed his first killing, a murder spree which would span over a decade, resulting in at least 8 people dead. So Christie's MO in these murders were gassing his victims before strangling them to death. Sometimes afterwards, he would then carry out acts of necrophilia on the victims' corpses. The first murder occurred on the 24th of August 1943 when Christie's wife Ethel was actually out of town. The first victim was an Austrian woman named Ruth Fürst, a 21-year-old munitions worker. Her wage at the munitions factory wasn't great, so she sort of did prostitution on the side to have enough to live. And Christie and Fürst met at a snack bar, I believe it was in the local area, where Ruth Fürst usually met some of her clients. Christie invited her back to his flat to have sexual relations, and following this, Christie impulsively strangled her in the bed with some rope, asphyxiating her, and this eventually killed her. After Ruth died, Reg hid her remains underneath the living room floorboards, but after one night, he then decided to move her body and subsequently buried her in the back garden. Now, not long after the murder, Reg left his post at the police station and found a job as a clerk at a radio factory, and this is where he met his second victim, 32-year-old Muriel Amelia Eady. In October 1944, Christie took Edie back to Rillington Place, having told her that he had made a, quote, special mixture that could help cure her bronchitis. Christie told Muriel that she had to inhale this mixture from a jar with a tube which was inserted in the top. The mixture itself was actually something called Friar's Balsam, which is also known as tincture of benzoin, which Christie used to disguise the smell of domestic gas. Just to note at this point, in the 1940s, coal gas was 15% carbon monoxide. So Muriel sat and inhaled this special mixture. However, when her back was turned, Reg put another tube into the jar, which was actually connected to the gas tap. So Edie was breathing in the gas and she soon fell unconscious. Reg then subsequently choked her, carried out necrophilia on her dead body, and buried her in the back garden next to where he had buried Ruth. Now, the next victims, this was part of a huge story involving a man named Timothy Evans, one of the largest, the worst miscarriages of justice in British history. Husband and wife of a year, 24-year-old Timothy Evans from South Wales and 19-year-old Beryl Thorley moved into the top floor flat at Rillington Place in April 1948. This was the flat that Reg was previously the occupier for before they moved downstairs. In October, the couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Geraldine. In November the following year, Beryl fell pregnant again, but she was extremely concerned because they really struggled to support one child, let alone two. Timothy, her husband, couldn't read and he only had a basic job as a van driver, which obviously did not pay well at all, and this put a massive strain on their marriage. As a result of speaking to neighbours about her worries, Beryl spoke to Reg Christie, who actually told her that he could carry out an abortion for her, even though this was illegal at the time. And her husband, Tim, was completely against the idea of abortion. The two got into a physical confrontation regarding the matter. However, the following day, November 8th, Beryl visited her downstairs neighbour for the procedure to be carried out. However, Reg Christie gassed her, strangled her, and proceeded to rape her post-mortem, and he then hid her body. When Beryl's husband, Timothy, returned from work later that night, Reg told him that Beryl had died during the procedure and that the two of them had to hide her body to cover their tracks so that they couldn't be charged with manslaughter. As I say, this procedure was illegal, so there would have been very severe consequences if it was found out. Christie actually managed to convince Timothy to visit his relatives in Wales and leave his young daughter Geraldine with Reg to give to a couple in order to divert suspicion by telling relatives Beryl and Geraldine were away on holiday. However, when Timothy came by on the odd occasion and asked Reg how Geraldine was doing, he actually refused to tell him. As a matter of fact, Christie had actually hidden both Beryl and Geraldine's bodies in an upstairs flat, which was vacant at the time due to construction work being carried out on the building at the time. On the 2nd of December 1949, the bodies of Beryl Evans, Geraldine Evans, and a 16-week-old male fetus were found behind a sink and under wood by the door in the wash house, located outside in the back garden. Christie moved their remains after the carpenters had finished work on the property. Both Beryl and Geraldine had been strangled, Beryl with a rope and Geraldine with a tie. And Beryl was actually assaulted prior to her death around 3 weeks previously. Something quite odd is the fact that there were no reports of any unusual odours from decomposition reported by workmen or any residents of 10 Rillington Place. Not even the dog acted strangely. And this obviously is very strange because if the bodies had been lying in the outhouse for 3 weeks, workmen were going in and out of it at all hours of the day. So you would think that someone would have noticed something was off, but nobody did. Interestingly, the pathologist couldn't find any evidence that any sort of pill or substance was taken by Beryl to abort her child. Beryl did, however, have vaginal bruising. However, the medical examiner refused to take a semen sample for reasons unknown. What should also be noted here is that none of Christie's previous victims were found at this point. Authorities overlooked the fact that there could have been more bodies buried in the back garden. They only ever physically examined the garden, looking around it, but not very well. And this bit is so infuriating. But a human femur bone was actually propped up against a fence and it was missed during this search.
What?
It was, I know, it's crazy. And even Christie's dog had actually dug up Muriel's skull, which again was missed by police because Christie had actually, after the dog had dug it up, Christie threw it away into a nearby house which had been bombed. The skull was actually later found, just to say at this point. But if the police had actually been more competent during their searches, perhaps they would have caught Reg Christie sooner. And if they had, more than 5 innocent lives could have been spared, including that of Timothy Evans. On the 30th of November, days before the bodies were found of Beryl and Geraldine, Timothy Evans went to police and told them that his wife was dead. He claimed to have given her a bottle of something, he didn't know specifically what it was, that a stranger, who he later named as Reg Christie, had given him to help abort their unborn child. However, the process went wrong and he disposed of the body in the outside drain. Now, he later actually changed his statement and told police that he helped Reg Christie move the body to the vacant flat, but that Reg had thrown Beryl's body in a sewer drain. But no body was found, and the manhole cover where the drain was outside of Rillington Place needed at least 3 people to open it. So obviously this didn't quite, seem right. Timothy clearly didn't actually know where his wife's body was, which suggests the later confession that Timothy gave was fabricated by police, as there were a number of loopholes in his supposed confession. Timothy then told authorities that he gave his daughter Geraldine to Reg to give to a couple to care for her, and subsequently left for Wales, which, as far as he was aware, was entirely the truth. However, Timothy's confession didn't seem to be very genuine. Much of it didn't sound like it actually came from the man himself. Several words and expressions throughout being really out of place. Timothy wasn't exactly an intelligent individual. He had an IQ of around 70, so many of the expressions in this statement were far too advanced for him to actually know. Also, Timothy's flat was searched, and what was found was extremely confusing. There was a stolen briefcase and papers scattered everywhere, including a newspaper clipping regarding the infamous torso murder. And apparently, authorities must have forgotten that Timothy couldn't read. So, why would he have newspaper clippings and papers in his apartment when he couldn't read? The evidence seemed to have been planted. Also, in Evan's confession, several other details didn't seem to match up. When he was pretty much forced into making a false confession due to the emotional state he was in after he was told about the situation. He claimed to have locked the wash house. However, this was not the case due to workmen being in and out of all hours of the day, like I've said. And he claims to have left his daughter alone at the property for 2 days following the murder. However, no cries were heard. Of course, obviously, if a child's left alone, they're obviously going to cry because nobody's there to look after them. And I believe Geraldine was only about 18 months old at the time. So she would have definitely, made a fuss,
Yeah.
Also, quite, heartbreakingly, Timothy didn't actually know that his 18-month-old daughter was dead until police at Notting Hill police station asked him about her clothes. He apparently completely broke down, and it was at this point, because he was in an emotionally fragile state, he was tricked into giving a false confession. Afterwards, however, he withdrew this confession after he was charged, and this was when he blamed Reg Christie for the murders of Beryl and Geraldine, as obviously Reg Christie was the last person to see them both alive. Police seriously mishandled their investigation into Timothy Evans. They apparently showed him, as I've already mentioned, the clothes that belonged to Geraldine and his wife Beryl, and they actually told him several details about the discovery, where they were, like the fact they were found in the wash house. And when conducting murder investigations, it's important for the killer themselves to admit certain details, such as where the bodies are hidden, just to confirm that they were indeed the person who did it. But police seem to sort of tell him all these little details so he would know what happened, therefore tricking him into basically telling them what happened. Like they discreetly sort of told him throughout these interviews and questionings what had happened, so he knew,
That's so messed up.
Yeah. When Tim was initially brought in for questioning, he thought that it was actually in regards to the stolen briefcase in his apartment and not the murders of his wife and daughter. As I've already said, he didn't even know his daughter was dead at this point. On the 11th of January 1950, Timothy Evans went to trial for the murder of his young daughter Geraldine. However, the prosecution didn't pursue a second murder charge for Beryl's death. He was charged in relation to both deaths. However, at this point, Geraldine's case seemed to be the most important to go forward with due to any lack of motive. He had absolutely no reason to kill his daughter, whereas his relationship with his wife was a little broken, I guess, after they fell out a number of times over the botched abortion. Evans denied murdering his daughter, and the defence actually severely let Tim Evans down. They didn't even investigate his version of events. they were seemingly already convinced that he was guilty, despite the fact they never even questioned any witnesses or anything like that. They didn't look into any of his claims or anything like that. So they severely let him down in that sense. Now, this is really frustrating, this next part, right? Hope you guys are keeping up, because honestly, it's crazy. It really is. Something to me, which is extremely dodgy in this case, is that Reg Christie himself was a principal witness for the Crown at the 2-day trial of Timothy Evans, even though Timothy told authorities that Reg was involved in Beryl's death. It is believed that the Crown actually saw the War Reserve policeman as one of their own, and they genuinely treated his testimonies as 100% fact.
What?
That is infuriating.
Yeah, which you wouldn't see that happen anywhere today, regardless
No.
of their position in authority. Christie denied the accusations against him and told the court about numerous arguments that Timothy and Beryl had in the months leading up to her death. And when they were presented information regarding Geraldine's death, Reg claimed the tie that was found around her neck had belonged to Timothy Evans, which was something which was actually later disproven. It actually belonged to a Mr. Kitchener, who was actually the occupier of the vacant flat up the stairs in Rillington Place. Reg had taken it. He must have grabbed it after placing the bodies in the vacant apartment. Despite the fact that Reg's criminal record came to light, which actually resulted in his termination from his job at the post office, the jury found Timothy Evans guilty after only 40 minutes of deliberations.
Oh my
Now,
God.
Timothy...
That's horrific.
It really is. Honestly, it really is. Timothy was really taken advantage of here. He was far from perfect. He did have a bad temper and, had a number of fights with his wife. He was known to be a fantasist, but he made up really extraordinary lies, such as his father being an Italian count. It's reported that, he only had the mind of an 11-year-old child. So, what we were all like as 11-year-olds. You always sort of enjoy to have an imagination and,
Yeah.
sort of
Live in
just...
your own little bubble.
Yeah. And Timothy also did drink quite heavily, and all of the above was used against him at his trial. Despite the fact he never had any previous criminal convictions, he'd never been in trouble with the law before. An appeal was launched in an effort to prove his innocence, but he was taken to the gallows at Pentonville Prison on the 9th of March 1950, where he was hanged as an innocent man.
Oh my
my
God.
Wow.
That's insanity.
What the hell?
Honestly, there is so much more to this case you will not believe, right? Okay. Reg Christie subsequently spent the next 3 years laying low and managed to find work as a clerk at the British Road Services. And at the same time, new tenants moved in to Rillington Place, which included a number of West Indies immigrants. And the Christies didn't like them at all. And at one point, it was reported that Ethel, Reg's wife, was assaulted by one of them. I'm not really sure what happened with that. I couldn't find any information as, if anything was laid against one of these neighbours or anything like that. But somehow Reg managed to keep the back garden of the property to himself so that his neighbours had no access. Obviously, in hindsight, this was because he had buried bodies in the back garden and he didn't want anybody to find them. But obviously this wasn't known at the time. Now, Reg and his wife Ethel's relationship hit another rocky patch once again after these immigrants moved into the building, and she suggested that the couple move somewhere else. She was, like I say, not She wasn't a fan of the immigrants upstairs, and she was really annoyed about having to share the outside washroom with them. And she also continued to ridicule her husband about his impotence. And Reg became extremely agitated, very angry and annoyed at Ethel's constant nagging. And to make matters worse, he quit his job. He had told his employer that he had found a better job, but he actually had nothing in the pipeline, nothing lined up. He simply stayed at home. I believe he went on to benefits after that, but I think I mentioned that a bit later on. Now, on the 14th of December 1952, Reg Christie struck again, but this time even closer to home. That morning, he strangled his wife Ethel in bed. Christie explained her noted absence to a number of friends and family. However, his story regarding her whereabouts were all different. He told one that she was in Manchester, another that she was in Sheffield, etc. And she seemed in fine fettle a few days prior to her disappearance, so for her to take off on a holiday, which was what Reg had told a lot of people had happened, was a bit strange. As I've already said, Reg quit his job and went on unemployment benefits, and as a result of having such little money to his name, he started to sell Ethel's jewellery, including her wedding ring, her watch, and some of their furniture. And after this, something which was extremely suspicious and telling was the fact that on the 26th of January 1953, Christie forged his wife's signature and managed to withdraw all of her money from her bank account. However, Ethel's murder wasn't Christie's last. In early 1953, 3 more women became victims to the Rillington Place Strangler. In February, a prostitute named Kathleen Maloney. On the 19th of January, Rita Nelson, a pregnant woman who was visiting from Belfast. And on the 6th of March, Hectorina McLennan, a Scottish woman who was living in London at the time with her boyfriend. Now, Christie lured Maloney, Nelson and McLennan back to 10 Rillington Place, as he had done with his previous victims, and gassed them in a similar fashion to Muriel Eady, you know, with the gas tap and the pipes, and he apparently filled the room with this gas, but this didn't add up because if he was there, this gas was 15% carbon monoxide, so it would have affected him too. But regardless, they were all poisoned, strangled with rope, and then raped as they died. After wrapping the victims in blankets, he hid their bodies in a small alcove behind the back kitchen wall, which he managed to hide through wallpapering the area. On the 20th of March 1953, Christie actually moved out of 10 Rillington Place after fraudulently subletting his flat to a Mr. and Mrs. Riley. He actually initially met Mrs. Riley and brought her back to the flat. I believe she could have been his next victim. However, her husband actually showed up, and this caught Christie off guard. After evicting the new tenants the same night they moved in, the landlord actually allowed the top floor tenant, Beresford Brown, to use the Christie's kitchen. 4 days later, on March 24th, Brown discovered the alcove in the kitchen and peeled back the wallpaper, revealing the perfectly preserved bodies of 26-year-old Maloney, 25-year-old Nelson, and 26-year-old McLennan. The police were then informed of this grisly discovery and immediately went looking for the previous tenant, Reg Christie. Christie actually, after he moved out of Rillington Place, stayed at a Roton house in the King's Cross area of London, where he had actually booked a room for a week. And on the 24th, he left after hearing news that bodies had been found at his previous address. Authorities eventually caught up with him on the 31st of March, and he was arrested near to Putney Bridge. Quite interestingly, the only things in his possession when he was caught was a number of coins and a newspaper clipping about Timothy Evans being in custody. Upon his arrest, Christie admitted to killing Maloney, Nelson and McLennan, as well as his wife Ethel, but not Ruth First, Muriel Eady, Beryl Evans or Geraldine Evans. He did later admit to killing Ruth, Muriel and Beryl, burying their bodies in his back garden and in the outhouse. However, he did not admit to 18-month-old Geraldine's murder. It is widely believed, however, that he lied about this so that he wasn't treated badly by other prisoners. Police believe that this was the case here. Ethel's body was later found under floorboards in the front room, and Ruth and Muriel's skeletons were found in the back garden where Christie had buried them. As a result of Christie's confessions, Timothy Evans was eventually granted a posthumous pardon by the High Court, and his living relatives were given compensation for his wrongful execution and miscarriage of justice. Capital punishment cases, including Evans's wrongful death sentence, led towards the 1965 abolishment of capital punishment for murder in the United Kingdom. Now, something that came to light, which is honestly really sinister, during the police investigations, was that Christie had actually collected pubic hair belonging to each of his victims, which he stored in a small tobacco box. I believe it's probably, sort of a trophy he took from each victim.
Yeah.
But after comparisons, some of the hair was left unaccounted for. Because they compared it to all of the victims they found, but some didn't match any of the victims. So, I mean, it could have been other prostitutes, but some believe that Christie may have actually had more victims, possibly during his policing career. As I mentioned, he was known to follow women and write about their whereabouts and things like that. So, I mean, it could have been that he had more victims, but authorities never looked into this any further. They never looked into any other missing persons case around the time that happened in the Notting Hill area. Others do argue, though, that it's unlikely Christie carried out his crimes elsewhere other than 10 Rillington Place, because, that's where he killed all of his other victims. So to sort of venture away from that would have been, quite difficult, I would imagine.
Imagine how many people, though, they could have saved if the police weren't so negligent.
I know, police negligence is a huge part of this case. Quite shockingly, Reg Christie was only ever put on trial in regards to the murder of his wife Ethel in June 1953. However, he pleaded insanity. The doctor who evaluated Christie testified, however, that Reg had a, quote, hysterical personality but was not insane. And as a result of this testimony by the doctor, the jury rejected his plea of insanity. After 85 minutes of deliberating, Reg Christie was found guilty of murdering his wife Ethel. On the 15th of July 1953, Reg Christie was hung at Pentonville Prison by the exact same executioner that had put to death Tim Evans, a man named Albert Pierrepoint. Rillington Place no longer exists. It was renamed a year after Reg Christie was hanged to Ruston Close. However, the entire street was eventually demolished, and in modern day, Bartle Road in London is now where Rillington Place once stood. And that's the case.
That is...
Jeez.
Just
That's
crazy.
insanity.
I can't believe he was only charged with the murder of his wife. Like,
That's it.
what the hell?
Yeah.
It's infuriating. The whole case is just, oh wow. I'd never heard like the full
Wow.
details of that case before. I mean, when you were like telling us about it, though, I remember seeing a bit of it on the TV series, but yeah, I didn't even realize that like how many people he actually killed. Well,
Yeah.
that they know of.
Yeah.
That they know of.
How
That
many
just,
was it in total?
Sorry?
How many was it in total?
At least 8.
Oh, right. Wow. And he was only charged with one.
And
Wow.
he could have killed way more.
I
Yeah.
can't believe that they, that miscarriage of justice, though,
I know.
hanging that poor man.
Oh my god, that is so heartbreaking.
I mean, obviously it's like really interesting case as well, though. Like, obviously it's
Honestly,
horrifying,
I
but
could not squeeze all of the information into it because, I've talked about it for ages already, but it's like there are so many more details. The sources that I used, honestly, they are far more detailed, and we will obviously leave them in the podcast notes for you guys to check out yourselves. But honestly, it's insane.
I'm literally lost for words at this case.
Yeah.
Just because I don't even know what to say. I'm just.
I know. I was
gobsmacked
thinking you
at the
guys were all being quite
entire
quiet
thing.
there. I was like, oh.
I was shaking my head most of the
It's one of
time.
those cases that literally infuriates
Yeah.
you.
I'm just. How did that even happen?
It almost sounds like a work
I know.
of fiction,
Yeah, if it
just-
feels like a story.
I'm surprised it's not
Fiction story.
actually known more about, because
I know, I feel like
I've never
yeah,
heard
Yeah.
of it. No.
I wouldn't say it's actually that well known from what I know.
yeah,
Um,
because
I guess
obviously
maybe like our generation probably aren't really aware of it.
yeah. Well, you see so many people covering, the likes of serial killer cases, or speaking about serial killer cases or things like that, but I have never seen anybody cover this particular case, and it's insane. Like, I am honestly so surprised no one has.
Are you
No,
covering
I
it?
hadn't even heard of the name
Are you,
when you
are
told
you going
me.
to cover it on your channel?
I might do, yeah.
Because that would be insane.
I think it would be.
I would really.
I think it would be like, I don't know, like a 3-parter, because honestly,
Well, there's a
I
lot
did
of
not
information.
manage to
in it.
squeeze everything in. I just,
It would be really long.
yeah, because it honestly,
That'd be really interesting to watch.
yeah. But I was thinking of doing it on my channel, but yeah, I might do.
Do it.
Okay.
I really want to see all the details, every little bit of detail.
Okay. Well,
So guys,
that's
yeah,
what I
this
could
is just
do.
a teaser.
That's what I
This is just a
could-
teaser for
yeah.
Kirsty's big series.
Yeah. I should probably try and get it released for Halloween, a Halloween series on it.
Well, yeah, because it's very
That would be
Yes.
crazy.
Understand.
That's a good
It's sort
idea.
of
Thanks for that.
spine chilling.
It's okay. Guys, everyone, go watch the miniseries when it comes out on Kirsty's
Yeah.
channel in the near future. You'll have all more details. I'd be really interested to know what everyone else thinks about this case, as
Same.
per always.
Yeah.
Leave a
Yeah.
comment if you're watching on YouTube, or tweet it to us on social media, or DM, or whatever floats your boat, to be honest. But yeah, this case is actually insanity to me. I can't believe how much police incompetence and negligence and I just don't even know what to say without getting irrationally, it's not even irrationally angry,
Yeah.
just downright
Yeah.
angry at this entire
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
The hell?
I know.
For lack of a better expression, what the hell?
Well, yeah, I think it speaks volumes that by the end of it, we're all just sitting here in silence.
I
Like,
know.
silence,
I know.
I know. I can't even fathom it, honestly.
It's so big that there's so much. What? What? I don't even know what to say. But yeah. And that brings us to the end of this segment. We'll be right back. Never flip. I read the wrong bit and I was about to say we'll be right back when Molly Westbrook will be discussing a massive case. I've still got the last episode's podcast open. Can you imagine if I said that? Molly's like, what the hell? She's like, oh shit. And that concludes the main segment of this episode. We'll be right back momentarily for a quick discussion about what's going to be happening next with this podcast. Theme music.
Theme music.
Theme music.
Oh, I love the harmony there. That was fun. Okay. As you all know, Halloween is coming up very, very soon, and we've all decided that we want to do something big for such a spooky holiday. So we've decided, drumroll please, that we'll be doing a dedicated Halloween special to conclude season 1 of the podcast. Yeah, party! Whoop,
Yay.
whoop, whoop, whoop. After this Halloween special, we will be taking a short hiatus between season 1 and season 2, just so that we can, have a little bit of a holiday before jumping right back in with season 2.
Okay, so for the Halloween episode, we're going to be having a question and answer. So I want to open it out to all the listeners to leave questions. Either you can do it on YouTube or on social media, so we can discuss anything that you would like to ask us.
Yeah, I'll also be doing an Instagram stories, and I think putting it in the end of my videos up until Halloween. So if you see those, send us questions. We'll be really, really excited to answer those.
Another thing as well, we're going to be discussing our own spooky experiences, and I think it would be cool actually to discuss other people's as well if they've got any to share.
Oh,
So
yes.
if anybody has any real life experiences that they can't really explain, or maybe they thought it was...
Paranormal.
Yeah, we would love to hear
Spooky.
what you have got for us so we can discuss it in the next episode.
That's scary. I'm home alone right now, guys, and you guys are talking about paranormal. I'm scared.
I love the paranormal.
Me too. It's gonna be really exciting.
I just find it
Yeah,
fascinating.
it's gonna be really exciting to record that episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Dark Curiosity says, if you've got any paranormal experiences, email it to us. Leave it in a comment down below. They're probably too long to send on like a tweet, but send them our way. We'd be more than happy to read them dramatically for you.
Hell yeah.
We're very good at dramatic reading. I'll also turn the bass up on my microphone, and it'll be like super spooky.
Spooky.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That's the Halloween special. Coming soon to a podcast near you. And I believe that's everything that we have for you in today's podcast episode. Thank you so much to everyone again for tuning in and listening along. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I don't really know where else you listen to podcasts on, but I've heard there's quite a few places you can listen to podcasts. I don't know where I was going with that. I got distracted. Sorry, there was a spider crawling on my wall and I got distracted by it. I was like, where are you going, Mr. Spider? Links to all our channels can be found in the episode notes, along with links to sources used in this episode. Don't forget to send us questions and paranormal experiences. I'm really excited to hear and listen and read and do all that good stuff for the Halloween special. That will be coming out on Halloween, on the day, which is a Thursday, I think, this year. Right?
It is, yes.
A spooky
I think it is,
Thursday. And with all that being said, we will see you in the next episode.